Franklin County is haunted by the monuments of its industrial past. This area was shaped by the manufacturing and industries that were drawn here. At the county's core is the city of Greenfield, which in its infancy was the northern district of Deerfield, but its proximity to water, a vital resource of the time, led the industrialists of the era to found the industries here that would later shape what this community would become.
The settlers are starting to work up the Connecticut and finding the tributaries, and one thing they most definitely would have discovered, that there was such an abundance of water power. Given that the population was expanding, certainly towards the coast, there wasn't that many, just not that many locations where you could set up and have a substantial source of power to run machinery and whatnot. At the time, you didn't have overland transportation routes, so the water here, even though we're 100 miles inland, it was still very feasible to get substantial cargo out of this area. So it was an attractive place to, in this period where water power was a source of power.
Greenfield was a really early settled town back in colonial days and was already pretty prosperous in the beginning of the industrial age, before the Civil War. Before all that stuff had been taking place, Greenfield was establishing itself with the advent of the railroad, the proximity to the Hoosick Tunnel, and of course the Connecticut River to travel things up and down.
The very first industries that are considered large-scale metalworking industries started right here in Greenfield with the cutlery industry. The distinction, what sets Greenfield apart is it's recognized as where the very first mass production methods were applied to metalworking, namely the cutlery industry.
One of the chief one was the John Russell Cutlery Company. The Green River Knives were, I believe he started his factory in the late 1830s on the Green River. His father was a blacksmith, and he had been to Europe and seen the work done by the guilds there and said, we can build this here, and began a cutlery company. And the cutlery company grew so big that it moved to Turner's, and then sold that plant to his grandson, who then started the Wiley and Russell Company. But it was really John Grant who had invented the die for cutting threads, standardizing of threads, that started the major precision tool industry in Greenfield that it became famous for. The Greenfield name is still world renowned because of that. The first taps and dies being sold everywhere in the world were coming out of Greenfield by the turn of the century.
Before that, any kind of threaded devices, whether it was fasteners or threaded devices used to move things, were very crude. There were no standards. In early 1870s, that all changed here when patents were taken out by John Grant, who created a high-quality, inexpensive method for cutting screw threads. Those patents were acquired, and the Wiley and Russell Company was started, and that was the start of the tap and die industry. Early on, these companies had very close ties with the armory and the defense industry, and by the time we get to the era of World War I era, which is roughly when the mergers take place that created Greenfield Tap and Die, we see a very close connection between what was then called the War Department and the industries here in Greenfield.
The tap and die can't be underestimated how important it was, because basically without a tap and a die, you can't ship things to someone and have them assemble it at a later date. So standardization was one of the keys to Greenfield Industries.
Even before Pearl Harbor, there are efforts underway to take advantage of the expertise of the companies in Greenfield to support this war effort. And that was one notable was the building that is now on Sanderson Street that still houses what's left of Greenfield Tap and Die. The Kennametal plant was built by the federal government, well, financed by the federal government, and was finished in 1940, and it was specifically set up to support the war effort. This is sort of the pinnacle of this evolution that happens here with these methods and the early metallurgy through the cutlery. All this history, all this knowledge is building up, and it manifests itself in this period of time. It's sort of like the golden age of the manufacturing here. And if you look at the periodicals from that time, if you look at personal letters from that time, which we have, you really see how proud everyone was here to take advantage of that heritage. It was something the country came here looking for the expertise. Not only our country, but even our allies came here, literally, right to Greenfield, to take advantage of this concept of making things that we have here.
You know, if you think back to the early days of the village smithy, where one guy could make sort of anything, and then now you've got, everybody has really specialized skills and trades. This all took place, you know, in the span of, say, 50 years or so, with the evolution of the introduction of the Bessemer process and the production of steel and making raw materials available, and thereby making machines available. So thread cutting machines and drop hammers and punches and presses and drill presses and all types of machinery that allowed the average guy, blacksmith, to now become a machinist or a mechanic, to start working on wagons, and then wagon with a motor on it's a horseless carriage, and those guys became mechanics, and next thing you know, they're building cars.
You know, everybody learns in school of these inventions. All right, there's, you know, the steam engine and, you know, the airplane, the car. What they don't get is how it really happens is not, you know, you don't go years and all of a sudden there's some big invention. It's gradually happening incrementally all the time. You know, making a gun teaches you how to make a sewing machine. Making a sewing machine, you learn how to make bicycles and automobiles and then airplanes.
The Museum of Our Industrial Heritage curates a collection of photos and items that explore the rich industrial history of our area.
The museum set its mission statement to preserve and educate the industrial history of our area. Now, the preserving is partially physical artifacts, tools and machines and things like that, but also photographs of the workers and the documentation of the lives that they lived and the lifestyle and culture that those jobs afforded them to have.
It's just not about metalworking and tools. It's about how a whole region has basically lived for a couple hundred years. I mean, you read the industrial history, you're reading the history of this region.
Even the museum's location is central to the industrial history of Franklin County.
Right here, where we're sitting, on this site, one of the earliest grist mills going back to around 1700, and there's been a mill activity here ever since. Right after the Revolutionary War, event happens which, in the Conservative Rebel, the social history of Greenfield, gives credit to Greenfield setting a direction towards a manufacturing city, and that was the arrival of a man named Colonel Moore. And right on this site we're on right today, on the Green River, in the 1780s, he attracted several key craftsmen from different trades to come to Greenfield, and they set up shop here. He built a 6-story mill, and there was a half a dozen or so different tradesmen, nail makers, and woodworkers, and even a ginseng mill in this mill. And some consider it to be the first industrial park in the United States.
In addition to their collection, the museum also works to connect people to the skills and knowledge that help build this country.
What always amazes me is that how much they did with so little. Nowadays it seems like we do a little with a lot. We have all this amazing technology at our disposal that we may not really fully understand. We kind of operate the machines, but we don't really figure the machines out. We can't. I'm worried that we're losing our ability to innovate and to invent. And that golden age around the turn of the century, around 1900, when people could just make anything out of anything and they could make it work, is something that I think we need to work on getting back for our future.
Like any cultural accumulation of knowledge and culture, it's a very fragile thing. And if we don't do something to stay in touch with our past, it's only going to take a generation or so, and people will be completely disconnected. And who knows what we'll lose with that. We're so disconnected from the products that we use and the value of them and the direct connection that humans have with their physical surroundings, that this is something that maybe we should give a lot of thought to before we let it slip away completely.
The Museum of Our Industrial Heritage is located on Meade Street in Greenfield. For more information on ours or their educational programs, please visit their website, industrialhistory.org.